Hello everybody and welcome back to another video. In this one, we are tackling this amazing mid-century teak sideboard that I purchased through Facebook Marketplace and drove a few hours to get. The main challenge on this piece is going to be carefully sanding that veneer and making some seamless repairs. I'll walk you through all of that, including the products that I use. Hi, I'm Lana, and together, let's make something beautiful, something made for you. My plan for this is to completely restore the veneered surface and modernize the legs. So there was a hutch top on top, and you can see where it sat for several years, and there's a few ring marks. The construction is teak veneer over presswood. And this is pretty typical in these vintage mid-century pieces, and it's important to note because it dictates how we approach sanding, especially considering how thin veneer can be. My first task was to get these sliding doors off, and this was a challenge. As you can see, I was trying to figure out how to remove them. There's usually a tab you can press down along the top, and then they'll just pop right out, but not in this case. I fumbled around, and it took a really long, awkward time to finally get them off. You really don't need to see that footage. There was a lot of grumbling and perhaps a couple choice words. And then, success. Looking at how they connect, I'm already speculating on how to reinstall them later. Hopefully it's smoother going back on. Now, before getting into the dirty work of cleaning, I decided to install the new legs. So out came the drawers, and then I opened up the legs to make sure that they would work. To make it easier to install the legs, I decided to flip the sideboard upside down. This gave me easy access to the base, and I wanted a stable base before I started cleaning and sanding the body. I also didn't want to end up flipping my newly finished piece upside down and risk damaging the finish. For the legs, I put them in place, marked where the holes should be, used a drill bit slightly smaller than the screws to pre-drill the holes, and double-checked to make sure that I wasn't drilling through the bottom. Then I put the screws in. What you're seeing here is my magnetizer demagnetizer, which is a pretty handy tool. I got it for about $5 at Canadian Tire, I think, and I love it. Once I had installed all 4 of the legs, I flipped the sideboard back over, and unfortunately, even though I was super careful, in one place you can see that I actually drilled right through the front. But that's okay, we can repair it. With the legs on, it was time to do some essential cleaning. Cleaning thoroughly before sanding is an absolute must. You want to make sure that you get rid of any grease and grime or waxes or oil buildup, because you certainly don't want to grind that into your surface. The product I prefer is Fusion TSP Alternative, mixed up in a spray bottle. Goes a long way and does a great job. With the cleaning done, I used Famo wood filler to address the damaged areas. This included any little chips, as well as that screw hole that I created by mistake, and then I let it dry and got to sanding. With these teak veneers, the finish usually comes off fairly easily, so I only start with 120 grit sandpaper because I don't want to do any unnecessary damage. As you're sanding though, things happen and it's okay. Repairs can be made, but you're going to see me do it right here. It's really fast, right along the edge. I sanded through the veneer. I'm carrying on, no worries, just keep going with 120 grit and sand off as well the damaged areas that I had filled. I decided to go in and use some acetone to see if I could remove a little bit more of this finish, because I just found that it wasn't actually coming off as easily or quickly as I normally find. Then I switched over to a different 120 grit sandpaper, something a little bit more expensive that I've found works really well, and I switched over to my Festool sander. This made a lot of progress. It really got down into the finish and removed it much better. I paused because I wanted to compare the two sanders here and the sandpaper. You can see how much better this left side is than the right side. So different sandpaper, different sander, absolutely made a difference for this particular project where I am sanding through a thin veneer and looking to go down to raw wood so that I can refinish it completely. I then repeated the exact same steps on the drawers, cleaning them, sanding them with 120 grit and my Festool sander. Once I finished sanding the drawers, I went back in with some wood filler. And then I moved on to the doors and repeated the process one more time. Now that everything had been sanded down with 120 grit sandpaper and the necessary areas filled, I went back in with 180 grit sandpaper, again, a good quality sandpaper, and my Festool sander. Make sure that I had closed the grain a little bit. And then finally, I went back in as well and hand sanded with 180 grit sandpaper to get rid of any swirl marks. And then I used acetone to wipe everything back and give myself a nice clean surface for my stain. I'm using Fusion Stain and Finishing Oil. This is a 2-in-1 stain and finish, and I'm using the natural here. It goes directly over the prepped wood. I'm using a foam brush to apply it. So onto all the drawers, and then onto all of the doors. After it had dried for about 10 minutes, I went back and wiped any excess off with a blue shop towel. Now at this point, I was looking at the finish and I thought, it's nice, but it's a little oranger than I want. And so I chose to go back over everything with a walnut stain and finishing oil, still by Fusion. I'd only done the drawers and 2 of the doors at this point. I hadn't done the entire body. I'm using a chip brush to apply it, again, letting it sit for about 10 minutes and then wiping it back with a blue shop towel. So rather than doing 2 separate applications, I decided to mix Fusion's natural with Fusion's walnut before applying the stain to the body. Same result, same look, just one less step. Now, you might be wondering why I'm doing all of this stain before I'm actually doing the wood repairs. And the reason is you want to get an understanding of the finish color that you're going to be working with before you actually start your repairs. Let's look at the products I'm using for the repairs. I've got a touch-up marker. I've got the walnut toner. I've got a sanding sealer. And I've got my Blendal sticks. Let's start the repairs on the side of the door, a less conspicuous spot. I'm starting with the sanding sealer. Once that dries, I'm going back in with some Blendal sticks. So I'm searching for a color that's similar in tone to the base wood color. Switching colors as necessary to get that wood look and match the tone. Now, after getting the color I wanted, I went in with the walnut toner to blend it all in nicely. Shake it up really well before you use it. Feeling confident with that, I moved into the drawer repair. This was the worst one. Again, starting with a color of the Blendal stick that's similar to your base color. I like to smudge it a little bit with my finger. Go right along the edge. If you've done a few layers or a couple of different colors, it's a good idea to put the sanding sealer in between them. And then once it's dry, it doesn't take very long, you can go back in with more Blendal sticks. I'm trying to quickly show which colors I'm using here, but what I'll do is in the description, I'll make sure that I include all of the products that I'm using for Blendal, for the sanding sealer, for the walnut toner. You'll have everything, and it'll give you a pretty good idea of what you need. I really like the multi-set because I never quite know what color I want. I can tell, though, that I often go back and use some pretty similar colors because a lot of woods that I do are in this sort of teak walnut tone. Now that I've done the Blendal sticks and I've got it looking how I want, I go back in with the walnut toner and make it a nice seamless finish. So the repairs on the door and the drawers were pretty straightforward. Let's go now to the side and top of the sideboard. I feel more confident now. I know what colors I'm using. I've got the process down. So I'm going to tackle the areas that are a little bit more obvious and a little bit more challenging. Like this area that I sanded through at the start. I've created another video, a shorter one as well, that I'll link in the description. It goes into this process with the products, specifically focusing on these veneer repairs that you're seeing here. So if you're interested, take a look. With all of these repairs done, it is now time to top coat. I'm going back to my natural stain and finishing oil by Fusion. Didn't need to leave it on as long, and then wiped it all back. Most of the spots were good, but even with all of that diligence, there were still a few places, like on the corners here, where after I wiped back the stain, you could see it. So I went back in with a touch-up marker in walnut and then top coated that with the Mohawk Perfect Blend sealer. It is now time to figure out how to reinstall these doors. I have a plan to get them to slide smoothly, starting with wax. Then I am screwing, see how that's going to move like that? I'm screwing the original screws so that I can lift up and then lift back on the tab. I had no concerns here because I thought these are the original screws. But they went in at an angle originally, and I screwed right through the finished front of my door. I needed to make sure my plan would work though, so I selected a new screw, marked my drill bit so that I wouldn't go too far, and carefully hand screwed these into place, checking to make sure several times that I wasn't going through. And voila, my plan actually worked. Now, how do I fix this front? So I put in a little bit of wood glue, taped it off, clamped it in place, and left it overnight. When I came back the next day, I used 220 grit sandpaper to sand it super smooth, and then went back in with that mix of stains to touch up the area. I then used my process with my touch-up marker and my toner, and it actually turned out really quite good. I went back over that with a little bit of natural stain and finishing oil. To clean up the drawers, I cleaned the insides with the Fusion TSP alternative. Then I used 220 grit sandpaper around a sanding sponge, cleaned that up again with the Fusion TSP, and then went back in with a wax to just really make the wood smooth and a nice finish. For the top drawer, it had these wood slats in it and this greenish yellow velvet, so I needed to take a slightly different approach. I unscrewed the slats, but of course that left holes in the drawer. So I had this 1/8 of an inch MDF. I measured and then used a ruler and a utility knife to cut it to size. And finally, I smoothed my cuts by hand sanding with 220 grit. Also used that beeswax finish on the drawer slides to make sure that when I put the drawers back in place, they would slide nice and smooth. This isn't very pretty, so I covered it with wallpaper. Something simple, textured, grass look feel, cut it with my Olfa Matte rotary cutter and ruler. It's peel and stick, so it went into place no problem. Let's take one last look at the before. Pretty good shape, changed out the legs, sanded back all of the veneer, fixed the damage that I had created as well as what was already there, and here's how it looks now. Check the description for links to all of the products that I used in this video, as well as a few more of my favorites. Thank you so much for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe if you want more videos like this one, and don't forget to follow on social.